Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. The night was quiet, almost too quiet for Marcus. He had just finished washing the last of the dishes, the clatter of ceramic now a faint memory. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the room as he stood at the sink, looking out the window into the darkness. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, and yet Rebecca was still not home. She'd told him earlier that day that she had a late session at the gym. Her voice was calm, collected. "Don't wait up," she'd said. "Connor's pushing me hard these days." Marcus trusted her. At least he thought he did. They'd been married for 6 years. Through job changes, medical scares, and the loss of a parent, they'd held each other up. Rebecca had always been his anchor, but recently something had changed. The distance between them wasn't physical, it was emotional, unspoken, and growing by the day. He looked at his phone, no messages, no missed calls. He tried hers again for the third time that night, straight to voicemail. Just as he was about to call it a night, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. Something about it made his stomach tighten. He hesitated, then answered. "Is this Mr. Marcus Bennett?" A calm but firm voice asked. "Yes," he replied, suddenly alert. "This is Officer Daniels with the Metro Police Department. I'm calling about your wife, Rebecca Bennett. She's currently being transported to Mercy General Hospital. We found her unconscious at a local motel off Interstate 9. The situation is stable, but she needs medical attention." Marcus froze. "A motel?" "Yes, sir." "What happened? Was she attacked? Was it a robbery?" There was a pause. There were no signs of forced entry or violence. However, she wasn't alone when we arrived. A man named Connor Hayes was with her. He called us when she collapsed. Said she wasn't feeling well. He's with her now. Connor Hayes. The name hung in the air like smoke. It took Marcus a full second to connect the dots. Connor. Her trainer. Without another word, Marcus grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, his heart thudding with dread. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Headlights danced across the windshield as he sped through the near-empty streets. He didn't want to believe it. There had to be another explanation. There always was. Maybe she'd gone there to help someone. Maybe she was meeting a friend. But why wouldn't she tell him? By the time he reached the emergency room, his hands were trembling. A nurse pointed him toward the waiting area where a young man in a gray hoodie sat with his head down. Connor. Marcus recognized him instantly from the one time he'd come to pick Rebecca up after a session. Fit, confident, charming, too charming. Connor looked up as Marcus approached. His eyes widened slightly, guilt flashing across his face. "You're Marcus," he said quietly. Marcus didn't answer. "What happened?" he demanded. Connor stood up. "She collapsed, said she felt dizzy. I called 911. I stayed with her until the ambulance came." Marcus's fists clenched. "Why were you with her? At a motel?" Connor hesitated. We... Look, this isn't the place. Let's wait until she wakes up. You can ask her everything." The door to the treatment area swung open. A nurse approached. "Mr. Bennett, your wife is awake. You can see her now." Marcus followed the nurse through the brightly lit corridors, his mind racing. He stepped into the room and there she was, Rebecca, lying in bed, pale but conscious. Her eyes met his and something shifted. Guilt? Fear? Shame? "Marcus," she began, but the words faltered. He sat beside her, his expression unreadable. "You were with him." She looked away. "I need you to say it," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Were you with him?" A tear slid down her cheek. "Yes." The weight of that single word hit him like a truck. He stood up abruptly, unable to look at her. "For how long?" he asked. "A few months," she whispered. He let out a short, bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "A few months. And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, wiping at her eyes. Marcus stared at her, stunned by the absurdity of that response. "You didn't want to hurt me? Rebecca, you've shattered me." She looked at him, eyes pleading. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely. You've been distant. We barely talk anymore. Don't turn this around on me. He snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. I've been working late to support us. I've been trying to fix things between us while you've been sneaking off with. He couldn't finish the sentence. He stepped back. I can't do this right now. As he turned to leave, Rebecca reached out weakly. Please, Marcus. But he was already gone. Outside the room, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Every memory they had built together felt poisoned. Every anniversary, every shared joke, every plan. They all seemed like lies now. He returned home, just before dawn. The silence in the house felt heavier now. Her absence was loud. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Sleep didn't come. Hours later, he sat at the kitchen table, Rebecca's phone in his hand. She'd left it behind in her rush to the hospital, or maybe the paramedics had taken it. He hesitated, but then opened it. What he found was worse than anything he could have imagined. Photos, messages, voice notes, long conversations filled with affection, plans, laughter, things she hadn't shared with him in months. I wish I could wake up next to you every morning. You make me feel alive again. He has no idea. The words blurred through the tears in his eyes. She had loved this man, not just a fling, not a mistake. This was something deeper, something deliberate. Marcus stared at the phone, his fingers trembling. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the intimacy, the emotion. She'd given a piece of herself to someone else, willingly. By evening, Marcus had made up his mind. He wasn't going to be the man who begged for answers or clung to a broken promise. He wasn't going to compete for his own wife's affection. He called his lawyer and started the divorce process. But there was one more thing he had to do. He needed to look the man in the eye, the one who had helped tear his life apart. He needed to confront Connor, not with violence, not with threats, just truth. The next morning, Marcus walked into the gym where Connor worked. The smell of sweat and steel greeted him, but it barely registered. He spotted him near the weights, training a client. When Connor saw him, he paused mid-sentence. His face tightened. Marcus waited until the session ended. Connor walked over, clearly tense. We need to talk, Marcus said. Connor nodded, motioning toward an empty hallway near the staff offices. What do you want to say? Connor asked. Marcus's voice was low but steady. I don't care about your excuses, I just want to know why. Why go after a married woman? Why sneak around and destroy something you had no right to touch? Connor didn't respond immediately. Then he said, It wasn't planned. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Marcus scoffed. You didn't mean to? You carried on for months. You met in motels. You shared feelings. That's not an accident. That's a decision. Connor looked down. I'm sorry. No, you're not, Marcus replied. You're sorry you got caught, but you're not sorry for the choices you made. He stepped closer. She's your problem now. But just so you know, love built on betrayal never lasts. Connor didn't respond. Marcus turned and walked away, not waiting for a reply. The weight on his chest felt lighter, not gone, but bearable. He had faced the truth, and now he was walking away from it. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. It bathed the city in golden light, soft and beautiful, and for the first time in days, Marcus took a deep breath and let it go. Tomorrow, he would begin again. The days following the confrontation at the gym felt like Marcus was drifting through fog. He'd always thought that if something like this happened, he'd be angrier, more explosive. But instead, there was just this cold stillness in him. A quiet disbelief that lingered in every corner of the house they had once shared. A house that now echoed more than it spoke. Rebecca was still at the hospital, recovering from a mix of physical exhaustion and stress. The doctors said she would be fine, but Marcus hadn't gone back since that night. She had sent a few messages, apologies, explanations, words that might have meant something weeks ago. He didn't respond. Instead, he focused on what he could control, calling his lawyer, beginning the paperwork, and packing away the pieces of a marriage that had unraveled behind his back. Every picture frame he removed from the wall felt like removing a splinter. Every shared item boxed up was a memory he didn't ask to remember. One evening, Marcus found himself standing in their bedroom, staring at the closet. Half of it was still filled with her clothes. Her scent lingered faintly on the sweaters. Her heels were neatly lined up along the floor, untouched since she last wore them. For a moment, he almost called her, out of habit, out of a desire for closure. But he stopped himself. Some silences, he realized, were more powerful than any words. Later that night, he sat at the dining table reviewing some documents. The divorce would take a few weeks, maybe longer, depending on how Rebecca chose to respond. But he had made up his mind. There was no going back. Just then, a knock came at the door. Marcus hesitated, unsure who it could be at that hour. When he opened it, Rebecca stood there. She looked tired, paler than he remembered, but her eyes were sharp, unmistakably alert. She was dressed casually, her hair pulled back, and she held a small bag in her hand. "I'm sorry for coming here unannounced," she said softly. I needed to see you. One last time." Marcus stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered. The silence between them was thick with everything unsaid. "I know you've seen everything," she said after a moment, her voice trembling. "The messages, the pictures. I don't expect forgiveness." He didn't answer. He just watched her. "I messed up," she continued. "More than I ever thought I could. And not just because of the affair, because I shut you out. Because I let something grow between Connor and me instead of fighting for what we had." "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Rebecca looked away. "I was scared. Scared of what it would mean. Scared of losing you. And deep down, maybe I thought I already had." "You didn't," he said. "You had me. Every day you had me." A tear slid down her cheek. "I know. And I'll regret what I did for the rest of my life." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are the signed divorce forms. I won't fight you on anything. I know I've hurt you enough already." Marcus took the papers but didn't look at them. Rebecca turned to leave but paused at the door. "I know I have no right to ask this, but someday I hope you can remember the good parts too, not just the ending." He didn't say anything. After she left, Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time. Her scent lingered in the air. It didn't bring comfort. A few days later, Marcus decided to take some time off work. His boss was understanding. "Go clear your head," he said. "We'll be here when you're ready." So Marcus drove. No destination in mind, just miles of road and a need to breathe again. He stopped at a small town upstate, booked a quiet cabin, and let the quietness of nature cradle him. The air was fresh. The silence here was different. Not heavy, but peaceful. It was in that quiet he began to process everything. Not just the betrayal, but the years leading up to it. The long hours he worked, the times he avoided conversations that needed to happen, the emotional distance that neither of them addressed. He wasn't blaming himself for her choices, those were hers alone, but he was willing to admit that their marriage hadn't been perfect. Still, cheating wasn't the answer. It never had been. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch of the cabin, Marcus received a message from Connor. It read, "I'm not reaching out for forgiveness. I just want to say that I never set out to ruin your marriage. What I did was wrong. I'm stepping away from my work at the gym. I need to figure myself out too. I'm sorry." Marcus stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without replying. It wasn't his job to give Connor closure. While away, Marcus began journaling, writing down his thoughts, fears, and what he wanted for the future. For the first time in a long time, he started imagining a life not bound by betrayal or anger, but one where he could rebuild. Heal? One evening, he walked to a nearby lake and stood at the edge, the wind rustling through the trees. The reflection of the sky danced on the surface. And in that stillness, he made himself a promise. To not let the pain define him. To rebuild stronger. To be open again. One day. When he returned home 2 weeks later, the house felt different. Not haunted anymore. Just his. A blank canvas. He painted the guest room. Rearranged the living room. Took down old photos and replaced them with art that inspired him. Life didn't get easier overnight. There were still bad days, moments where a song or scent brought it all flooding back. But there were good days, too. One afternoon, Marcus bumped into an old friend at the local market, Jenna, someone he'd known years ago from college. They caught up over coffee. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was warm, natural. He smiled more during that conversation than he had in weeks, and that was enough for now. Healing, he realized, wasn't a straight line. It was messy, slow, but possible. The divorce finalized quietly. Rebecca didn't try to see him again. She moved out of state, from what Marcus heard. Started fresh. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a distant sadness for what could have been. One morning, Marcus stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. The sun climbed over the horizon, golden and soft. For the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Hope. Months passed. The sting of betrayal had dulled, but the memory of it still lived in quiet corners of Marcus's mind. Some mornings he would wake up forgetting for just a second that Rebecca was gone, and then remember like a jolt to the heart. Other mornings he would wake with clarity, grateful for the progress he had made. The house no longer felt like a museum of what was lost. It had become something else, a reflection of who he was now. Brighter, lighter. The couch had been replaced, the walls painted fresh. Even the air felt different, as if he had cracked open all the windows and let the past drift out like old dust. He wasn't the same man who had stood in that hospital hallway, phone shaking in his hand. He wasn't the man who had stared at texts on Rebecca's phone, heart breaking with each message. That version of Marcus had been stripped bare. But from the wreckage, something stronger had begun to form. Still, there was one thing left he knew he had to do. Confronting Connor at the gym that night had given Marcus some momentary release, but it hadn't answered the question that had lived in his mind for far too long. Why? Why did it happen? He didn't want to hear apologies. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He just wanted to understand, to close the door once and for all. So he drove back to the gym. Not the one Connor had left, but the smaller one he'd recently joined. Marcus had heard through a mutual acquaintance that Connor had taken a job there, working behind the scenes, away from the spotlight. When Marcus walked through the doors, it wasn't rage that guided him. It was clarity, purpose. He approached the front desk and asked for Connor. The receptionist glanced up. "He's in the back. Want me to get him?" "No," Marcus replied. "I'll find him." He walked past rows of weights and machines, past people lost in their workouts. And there, near the back wall, Connor stood alone, re-racking dumbbells. He looked thinner, more subdued than before. The confident posture Marcus remembered had been replaced by something more reserved. Connor looked up and froze. Marcus didn't speak for a moment. The hum of machines and soft music filled the space between them. "I'm not here to fight," Marcus said finally. "You've already said what you needed to in your message. But I need to ask you something, not to forgive you, not to make peace, just to understand." Connor wiped his hands with a towel, nodded slowly. "Why her?" Marcus asked. "Of all people, why did you cross that line?" Connor let out a breath and sat on the edge of a bench. "I don't know if I can give you an answer that will make sense. But I'll try." Marcus remained standing, arms crossed, eyes locked on him. "It started with conversation," Connor said. "She would talk about stress, her work, things she didn't say to you. At first it felt harmless, but then it wasn't. It became emotional before it became anything else. And I was too weak, or maybe just too selfish, to stop it." He looked down. "I thought I was helping her feel seen, important, and I told myself that meant something. But the truth is, I didn't think about the damage it would do until it was too late." Marcus listened. Every word was like a stone in a river, sinking slowly. "Did you love her?" he asked. Connor hesitated. "I thought I did. For a while, but now, I think I just loved how she made me feel. Needed. Like I was someone. That's not love. That's desperation dressed up in attention." Marcus gave a slight nod. He didn't feel lighter, not exactly, but he did feel complete, like he'd reached the last page of a long, painful chapter. Well, Marcus said, stepping back, I hope you figure out who you are. I hope you grow from this. I don't wish anything else. Connor looked up, surprised. You're not angry? I was, Marcus said, but I don't want to carry that forever. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't bring anything back. With that, Marcus turned and walked out, leaving the past behind in that gym. Weeks later, Marcus got a letter. It was from Rebecca. He debated whether to open it. He stood in the kitchen, the envelope trembling slightly in his hand. Finally, he unfolded the note. Marcus, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I've started therapy. Real therapy. Not just talking to friends or pretending everything's fine. I'm learning more about myself than I ever wanted to. I don't say that to make you feel anything other than proud for yourself. You chose strength. You chose peace. You were a better husband than I ever told you. And I hope the next chapter of your life is filled with the love you gave so freely. I'll always carry that with me. Rebecca. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He didn't know if he'd read it again, but for now he didn't feel angry, just settled. One morning, Marcus returned to the cafe where he'd met Jenna a few months earlier. She was there again, this time sitting near the window with a book in her hands. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. He walked over. Is this seat taken? He asked. It is now, she replied with a grin. They talked for hours about books, music, random memories from college neither of them realized they still shared. It wasn't a grand romantic spark or fireworks, just comfort, laughter, something light in a world that had been heavy for too long. Over the coming weeks, they met more often. No pressure, no labels, just two people trying to reconnect with the better parts of life. Marcus,